I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
So we're on page 1 of our study of the book of Daniel, still in the introduction. And I would like to make a small correction from what was discussed 2 weeks ago. We didn't meet last week. But it's very easy to get confused around the timeline of how the book of Daniel begins. And so when I looked through the page, I said, well, there's a typo on the page. And then when you read, I think it's 1 Chronicles or 2 Chronicles, no, there's not a typo on the page. And then when you try to piece all of the accounts together of Jerusalem and its fall under Jehoiakim, you can easily come away with misunderstanding what's going on. And so what I'd like to do is fix the timeline. So sort of get that in our heads, what is going on here. Now we know that Josiah was the last good king of Israel. He died, though, in Megiddo, and he was killed by Pharaoh Necho. And that was, as I said, the last good king of Israel. Jehoahaz, his son, reigned in his stead, but he only reigned for 3 months before Necho had enough of Jehoahaz, took him off in Egypt, and placed Jehoahaz's brother, in fact, it was his older brother, Jehoiakim, on the throne. And Jehoiakim basically was a servant of Pharaoh Necho of Egypt. However, what the Bible really doesn't tell us specifically is what history tells us, is that Pharaoh Necho was defeated by Nebuchadnezzar in Carchemish in 605, 606 BC, depends on the specific date and who's dating what, but it's around that time. That's really one of the first firm dates in history we have, ever, of anything. Whenever we're trying to go farther back than that, we're dating in relation to other things. And that's why when you get back into the 2nd millennium BC, you can say, okay, it happened on this date, and then maybe 10 or 15 years later, the timelines get shifted a little bit. It's not because we were being lied to. It's because we found new evidence. We found new things to help us in our dating. Because remember, we're used to written history. We're like today. You can go on the internet and you can read the newspaper that would have today's date, yesterday's date. You could read a newspaper from a year ago. And it all has dates. We're used to dates. Calendars are our thing. They're a relatively new thing as far as the way we're going to keep time. Not new in the sense that older civilizations didn't have calendars, but they kept time, and their months and their dates were different, and they were in relation to their beginnings, whereas our calendars are usually based on the birth of Christ. At least that's where 2021 is. When the calendar was created, it's 2021 years after they believed Jesus was born. That's what it is. But, of course, we know history went on further behind that. And we don't have a lot of written history and oral history. We have archaeological history that we can dig up. We don't have books like we would write today. If you were to be able to come back 1,000 years from now, people 1,000 years, assuming that civilization doesn't break down, of course time goes on, we're assuming that, probably would have a better idea of dating our time period because of how meticulous we were in keeping dates. Now, perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps 1,000 years from now, they'd have just as much trouble as we do from 1,000 years before. But what we do know about 606 BC is when Nebuchadnezzar beat Pharaoh Necho, and Jehoiakim was on the throne. So let's go to Daniel 1. We're gonna read 3 accounts of Nebuchadnezzar defeating Israel, defeating Judah, and taking off captives. And I want us to notice, some years and some events and how they happen. So, Dion, do you want to get Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2?
Mm-hmm. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God.
Okay. So we have here, Jehoiakim. What year of his reign did Nebuchadnezzar come? 3rd year. Okay. So he'd been reigning for 3 years. So at least that would be the typical reading. So he'd been reigning for 3 years. So if it's at 605, 606 BC, it's probably about 605 BC. That means Jehoiakim started reigning in 608 BC. Okay, we've got that. Nebuchadnezzar came, and Daniel makes it seem as if, okay, Nebuchadnezzar came in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, and everything happened in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim. In other words, all the articles of the temple were taken, and basically Jehoiakim was defeated, and you would assume that Jehoiakim died. And so if you're just reading Daniel, that's what you would assume. And really the reason why we'd assume that in Daniel is Daniel's not giving a history. The book of Daniel is not giving a history of what's going on in Judah, because the main character, Daniel, is not there. He's being carried off along with the articles of the temple. They carried off young men, according to verse 4. And so they had captives there. And so basically the book of Daniel is just giving, okay, this is the time we're in. Jehoiakim, this is when we came to Babylon, and this is why we're here. And that's just 2 verses. Everything else is going on in Jerusalem, in Judea. Daniel doesn't care. Daniel's not really concerned about that right now because he's not there. All he did was just give a quick summary. So for the actual account of it all, let's go back to 2 Kings. 2 Kings. We're going to go back to chapter 23. We're first of all going to get verses 31 to verses 35 to verses 37. We'll give that to Henry. 2 Kings 23, verses 35 to 37.
Now before him there was no king like him.
Second Kings. Second Kings 23.
2 Kings, yes. Right.
23, verse 35.
35.
Yeah.
So Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh, and he taxed the men to give money according to the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land, from everyone according to his assessment. Gave it to Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jephidah, the daughter of Adaiah and Ruma. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his fathers had done.
Okay, so this is before Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 23 is when the Pharaoh Necho was the one who placed Jehoiakim on the throne, having deposed Jehoahaz, his brother. The point I wanted to make in reading that was not that, yes, Jehoiakim was basically a puppet ruler of Necho of Egypt, but I wanted to know how long he reigned for. How long did Jehoiakim reign for? Jehoiakim, according to verse 36. It's 25, and he reigned how long? 11. All right. So now we have some extra knowledge. Nebuchadnezzar came in the 3rd year of of Jehoiakim. Nebuchadnezzar came in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. But Jehoiakim still had 8 more years. And in fact, you read the book of Jeremiah, and it's going to make it quite explicit that Jeremiah had that Jehoiakim reigned for 8 more years after what we read of in Daniel 1. And so let's continue doing that. So Jehoiakim didn't die. That gives us another clue to listen to. So let's go to 2 Kings 24, and we'll read verses, let's see. Let's read 1 to 6. So Dion, you want to get verses 1 to 3. Henry can get verses 4 to 6 of 2 Kings 24.
In his days Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, and the Lord sent against him raiding bands of Chaldeans, bands of Syrians, bands of Moabites, and bands of people of Ammon. He sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken by his servant, the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord, this came upon Judah, to remove them from his sight because of the sin of Manasseh, according to all that he had done.
And also because of the innocent blood that he had shed. For he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim rested with his fathers. Then Jehoiakim his son reigned in his place.
All right. So a couple things we need to see here. In the days of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, in his days, so that's Jehoiakim's days, Nebuchadnezzar came up, and Jehoiakim became a vassal for 3 years. Now, in order to become a vassal of something, you're going to be defeated. Necho was defeated at Carchemish. So it says Nebuchadnezzar came up, he made Jehoiakim his vassal. That, I believe, is what Daniel chapter 1 is talking about. That when there's that first wave of captives that are taken away, Nebuchadnezzar makes his presence known. He's going to take Jehoiakim basically and make him his puppet ruler. Jehoiakim was serving Necho of Egypt. Well, now he's serving Nebuchadnezzar, the one who's defeated. How long did he remain a vassal of Nebuchadnezzar, according to verse 1? 3 years. What did he do after that? He rebelled. And so he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. So that happens in the 6th year. That seems to really coincide with what Jeremiah has recorded for us in chapter 36 of Jeremiah. We're not going to read that. We're going to study that, Lord willing, in 2 weeks in our lesson on Jehoiakim's penknife. But that happens in the 4th and 5th year of Jeremiah 36, happens in the 4th and 5th year of Jehoiakim's reign. And so if Daniel says Nebuchadnezzar came the first time in the 3rd year, he was now a vassal 3 more years. So that's now 6 years. We still have 5 more years of Jehoiakim before he died. But Nebuchadnezzar came up, 2nd wave of captives, 2nd time captivity happened there when there was a rebellion. Now, 2 Kings has Jehoiakim dying. So again, this siege of Jerusalem, it didn't take a month. It would have taken a while. The siege of Jerusalem happened. Jehoiakim dies. Jehoiakim dies. And Jehoiachin, his son, reigns in his stead. Nebuchadnezzar didn't take Jehoiakim off to Babylon. That's the typo that's in our book. Jehoiachin is going to be taken off to Babylon. But Jehoiakim dies. He's not defeated by Nebuchadnezzar, but he did rebel. He did rebel. It took Nebuchadnezzar a while to take Jerusalem. That's the second wave. Jehoiachin remains in his stead. But where the confusion lies is what happens in 2 Chronicles. So let's go to 2 Chronicles, chapter 36. And let's read verses 5 through 8. Let's read 2 Chronicles, 36, verses 5 through 8. And we'll get who read last. I think it's Dion's turn to read. 5 through 8.
Yeah. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him in bronze fetters to carry him off to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar carried off some of the articles from the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and the abominations which he did and what was found against him, indeed they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Then Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his place.
All right. So, what does the chronicler here make it seem like happened to Jehoiakim in verse 6? What does it make it seem like happened?
He was carried off.
He was carried off. That's what it makes it seem. It says Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him in bronze fetters to carry him off into Babylon. And so, if you just casually read that, and you say, hold on a minute. Jeremiah has Jehoiakim remaining and dying in Jerusalem. 2 Kings has Jehoiakim remaining and dying in Jerusalem. Daniel really is silent on the matter, doesn't say one way or another. And the chronicler here seems to say, okay, Nebuchadnezzar carried him off into Babylon. But remember, the tense doesn't say Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him, bound him in feathers, and carried him away off into Babylon. It was his intent to carry him off into Babylon. This would have been the 605 siege, when he made him his vassal for 3 years. Yeah. That's what's being talked about here. And the way we can know that is not because I know what 2 Kings says, not because I know what Daniel says, but because I know what 2 Chronicles 36 verse 8 says. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim. If Jehoiakim has been carried out by Nebuchadnezzar, there are no more acts of Jehoiakim. The rest of the acts of Jehoiakim, all that he did, are they not found in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah? And Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his stead. If you follow the pattern, if we go back to chapter 35 of the chronicler, of 2 Chronicles. Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and his goodness, according to the law which is written in the law of the Lord, and his deeds, from the first to the last. Indeed, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Then the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king in his father's place in Jerusalem. There's a pattern in Chronicles. This king reigned for so long. All the acts that he did, they're written here. He died, and this person reigned in his stead. That's what happened here. The implication from the chronicler is that the people know what happened. Nebuchadnezzar was going to carry Jehoiakim off into captivity. Did not do it. Left him there as his vassal, which Jehoiakim remained for 3 years. He rebelled, and Nebuchadnezzar did come up. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't take him away. Jehoiakim died before. Jehoiachin, his son, reigned for 3 months, and then he was taken off into captivity, and Zedekiah, the final king of Judah, reigned as a vassal to Nebuchadnezzar until the end. There are actually 3 waves of captives. The first wave is from Daniel 1, and that's when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, among others, were taken off into Jerusalem. What we have after that, Jehoiakim remained king in Jerusalem. He remained obedient to Nebuchadnezzar for 3 years. He rebelled, in which Nebuchadnezzar again sent forces. He would have destroyed he would have taken off more captives, taken off more from Jerusalem. And that's what Jeremiah is really prophesying for. And just one second. So then after that, when Nebuchadnezzar installs Zedekiah, Zedekiah will reign, as we'll get to in a minute, for 11 years. And it will be at the end of Zedekiah's reign, that Jerusalem will be finally fully destroyed. And Israel taken off completely, or Judah taken off completely into captivity. It's harder when you're reading it on paper, and I don't have a map here or a chart here to sort of get that picture in your mind. But those are the events we're seeing. We need to recognize that Kings, Chronicles, Daniel, and Jeremiah, none of them give the entire story. And you got to recognize, okay, what part of the story is this book telling me about? Is it telling me about the beginning of Jehoiakim's reign, the middle of Jehoiakim's reign, or the end of Jehoiakim's reign? And that's how we can keep things straight. Because none of them really give the whole picture of everything. Dion, you had a question?
No, so for Jehoiakim,
Yes.
when they said he did evil,
Yes.
he did evil in the sight of God, or
Yeah.
evil to Nebuchadnezzar?
Well, he did both, but evil in the sight of God.
Yeah.
And Josiah, his father, was the last good king of Judah.
Okay.
And so Jehoahaz, his brother, was evil. He was evil. His son was evil. And his other brother, who is Zedekiah, who will be the final king of Judah, is also evil. So in other words, of Josiah's sons, 3 of them wound up being king. But Jehoiachin, Jehoiakim's son, was the one who reigned the less of them. Like, so Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah are all brothers. Jehoiachin is the son of Jehoiakim, but he's the one who got carried off into Babylon. If it makes sense. And that's the thing I wanted to correct, was, okay, what happened to Jehoiakim? Jehoiakim wasn't taken off into captivity. He died before that. 2 Chronicles makes it seem like he was, but if you read closely, Nebuchadnezzar didn't actually take him off. And so, what we have in the first 7 verses of Daniel, though, is Daniel, Hananiah, which is Shadrach, Mishael, which is Meshach, and Azariah, which is Abednego, were part of the captives carried off in that first wave of captivity. So what we have is Jehoiachin reigns in Judah. Let's get if we're still in 2 Chronicles 36, let's get verses 9 and 10, and that will be Henry's.
King Jehoiakim was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months and 10 days. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And the term of the year, King Nebuchadnezzar summoned him and took him to Babylon, with the costly articles from the house of the Lord, and made Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's brother, king of Judah and Jerusalem.
Okay. Now, there is a translation error in verse 9. And the way we know that is 2 Kings 24, verse 8 says Jehoiachin was 18 years old. He was not 8. He was 18 years old when he began to reign. And as we know from even English, it's very easy when you're copying numbers to miss a number. And that's what we have, a 1 and an 8. In Hebrew, the 18 and 8 are, it's easy to miscopy. It wasn't that the chronicler got it wrong, it's the copyist who copied it later got it wrong. And so Jehoiachin was 18 years old. How long did he reign? 3 months and 10 days. 100 days. The 100-day reign of Jehoiachin. Sometimes new leaders are evaluated based on their first 100 days. Jehoiachin was deposed after his first. He was taken out into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, and in fact, that's where he would remain. Matthew, in his genealogies of Jesus, records that it is Jehoiachin or Jehoniah in Matthew chapter 1, was carried off into Babylon. Was carried off into Babylon along with some of the articles of the house of the Lord. So again, Daniel describes this. He sort of gives us a summary. And Jehoiakim was carried off into captivity, leaving us with Zedekiah. Let's get verses 11 to 16. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly read this. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. And he also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear an oath by God. But he stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord God of Israel. Moreover, all the leaders of the priests and the people transgressed more and more according to the abomination of the nations and defiled the house of the Lord, which he consecrated in Jerusalem. And so we have Zedekiah here. He reigned 11 years. That puts 586 is about the year that that history records that Nebuchadnezzar finally destroyed Jerusalem. So that means if Zedekiah reigned for 11 years, that puts us at 597 BC, which of course aligns with the reign of Jehoiakim. Remember, he came in 608, died in 597. His son didn't reign for about 3 months, and then you add another 11 years and you get the reign of Zedekiah. And so Zedekiah was just as bad as all of them. And so the temple was burned. We would read, if we had time, you can read that down in verses 17 to 21. And many were carried back to Babylon as slaves, and that is the length of the whole Judean captivity. And so when you count the years of captivity that Jeremiah prophesied, the 70 years, typically people started with the first wave of captives, back in about 605, because when Cyrus lets the Jews go, that's about 535. And so that's 70 years. And so it all makes sense. And so once the temple was burned, and thousands were carried away, Judah was no more. But Jeremiah did prophesy that one day Judah would return. And that's Jeremiah 50, verses 1 to 20, which you can read on your own time. Judah would return so God could fulfill his promise of the Messiah. But Jeremiah also prophesied, which is what we'll get into in Daniel, that one day Babylon would be destroyed. Daniel's going to prophesy that too. It's going to be destroyed by the Medes and the Persians. Of course, we'll read about that in Daniel. And if we're still in 2 Chronicles 36, though, let's get the end of the story. If Jeremiah prophesied that Israel was going to return, did they return? Let's get 2 Chronicles 36, verses 20 to 23. 2 Chronicles 36, actually that's not right. Let's start in verses 22 and 23. I'll start in verse 21. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed her Sabbath, as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. Now the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the mouth, by the word of the Lord, by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put in writing, said, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kings of the earth, the Lord of heaven, has given me, and he's commanded me to build to him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah, who is among all his people. May the Lord, his God, be with him, and let him go up. And so Jeremiah had prophesied, you're going to go off into captivity, you will return, 70 years. 2 Chronicles highlights that that's what was going to happen. Isaiah had prophesied something very similar back in the days of Hezekiah, about 150 years earlier. And he even prophesied that that king's name would be Cyrus, which of course it was. And so that gives us the history. That gives us the history. So we start with Jehoiakim. That's when Nebuchadnezzar came the first time. He took some captives away. That would be where the book of Daniel starts. Then we have 3 years of Jehoiakim in Jerusalem. He rebels. Nebuchadnezzar sends more of his army there. It takes him a while to defeat it. Jehoiakim dies, but then he takes more captives to Jerusalem a second time. Puts Zedekiah in his place. Zedekiah reigns 11 years, and finally he rebels. Nebuchadnezzar sends his army again, destroys the entire place, and takes the last set of captives off into Babylon. That's the history. That's our time period. Next week, then, the Lord willing, we will take a look at Daniel himself. We'll continue with our introduction, taking a look at Daniel himself. Who is Daniel? And what type of role does he play in this book?
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the